So, I want you to imagine for a second that you're holding a tool in your hand.
Okay.
Let's say it's, I don't know, a piece of software or a business methodology or even just a physical object you use every single day. You know it works. You trust it completely.
Right, it pays the bills.
Exactly. It keeps you safe, and frankly, it makes you feel like an absolute expert. But then someone walks up to you and hands you something completely different.
And it's probably pretty clunky.
Oh, it's incredibly clunky. It's hard to figure out, it makes mistakes, and using it makes you feel like an absolute amateur. So your instinct, which is completely logical, is to reject it. You push it away and stick with what you know.
I mean, that is a completely rational, defensible decision.
It is. But the crazy thing is, history tells us that this exact rational decision is the precise moment you basically sign your own death warrant.
Yeah, it's the ultimate trap of human logic.
And that tension, that exact moment of decision, is what we are diving into today. Our mission for this deep dive centers on something we're calling the paradox of progress.
I really like that term.
Thanks. It's this brutal, undeniable historical reality that technological advancement is absolutely devastating to those who refuse it, but inherently essential to those who embrace it. So we're going to look at 3 massive historical case studies of technological rejection.
And we'll extract the core lessons from those failures.
Right. And then we're going to apply them directly to what you, listening right now, are almost certainly feeling, which is the rapidly shifting, often completely overwhelming landscape of artificial intelligence.
Because look, if you're listening to this, there's a very high probability that you are feeling the crushing weight of modern information overload.
Oh, absolutely.
The speed at which new AI tools, massive language models and generative systems are dropping is not just fast, it's fundamentally daunting.
It really is.
It feels like every single week there's a new platform you're supposed to master, a new workflow you need to integrate, just to ensure you still have a career a year from now.
It is exhausting, but I really want to reassure you, by the end of this deep dive, you are going to be equipped with a completely new historical lens. We're going to take this overwhelming tech wave, this tsunami of AI that feels so unprecedented, and we're going to transform it from a looming threat into a very clear, highly navigable pattern of human behavior.
Because we have been here before.
Many, many times.
Right. The modern resistance we see to artificial intelligence, the skepticism, the mockery, the desperate clinging to legacy systems, it's just a repetition of a very old, very fatal human mistake.
So we're going to take you on a journey today, from ancient Paleolithic caves to the blood-soaked mud of medieval battlefields, all the way into the top-secret, high-stakes laboratories of World War II.
It's quite the trip.
Okay, let's unpack this. To truly understand modern resistance to new tools, we really can't start in the 21st century. We have to start at the literal, biological beginning of human technological competition.
Right. We need to examine a time when a seemingly sensible, entirely logical rejection of a new tool resulted in total, absolute extinction.
We're going to start with a scenario we can call the parable of Og.
I love this one.
Right. So Og the Neanderthal. Now, I want you to picture Og. He is a popular, strong leader of his tribe. He is a genuinely great guy.
A real salt-of-the-earth kind of guy.
Exactly. And his tribe is doing incredibly well by the standards of the era. They hunt, they survive the brutal winters, and their primary apex technology is the fire-hardened stick.
And we really need to understand the mechanics of why the fire-hardened stick was so revolutionary for them. I mean, it wasn't just a piece of wood.
Right.
When you take a heavy branch, whittle it down, and hold the tip in a fire, you are fundamentally altering the cellular structure of the wood.
You're evaporating the moisture.
Right. Exactly. You evaporate the moisture and you harden the lignin. You're creating this dense, blunt force trauma weapon that won't easily snap when you thrust it into the hide of an animal. It was a proven, reliable, deeply understood enterprise solution for the Neanderthal era.
It had worked for generations. The tribe's entire culture, their hunting formations, their risk assessment, all of it revolved around the physics of the fire-hardened stick.
But then the catalyst happens.
Right. Og is out foraging or scouting, and he runs into a Cro-Magnon. And this Cro-Magnon isn't carrying a stick. He is carrying a spear tipped with a flint arrowhead.
And Og just sits there and watches this Cro-Magnon literally manufacture a new technology.
Yeah, he's napping flint. He's striking stones together to chip away these razor-sharp flakes. And Og is smart enough to realize this is a massive paradigm-shifting leap forward in hunting tech.
Because a sharp point penetrates deeper, causes more bleeding, and just kills faster than a blunt, charred piece of wood.
So he brings the concept back to his tribe,
He brings it to the elders, the decision makers.
the management team.
Exactly, the management team of the tribe, whose entire job is to keep the group alive and mitigate risk.
And what do? They shoot it down completely. But here's where it gets really interesting. They do not shoot this idea down because they're superstitious or because they're intellectually incapable of understanding it.
No, not at all.
They shoot it down with a list of completely factual, highly accurate objections.
And this is the crux of the tragedy here.
Yeah.
Every single reason the elders gave for rejecting the flint arrowhead was 100% physically and historically true.
They sit Og down and they basically say, look, Og, flint-knapping is incredibly hard.
And they are right. I mean, we know this from modern anthropologists who try to recreate stone tools. It requires understanding the specific angles of impact, a process called conchoidal fracture.
Right, you have to strike the core stone with a very specific amount of force at a very specific angle just to shear off a flake.
It's a highly technical skill.
And their next objection was safety. They said people are cutting their fingers.
Again, absolutely true. A freshly knapped piece of flint is literally sharper than a modern surgical steel scalpel. The edges are only a few molecules thick. Yeah, when you are learning to knap flint, you are going to slice your hands to ribbons.
Yeah.
You're going to get blood blisters.
And in a world before antibiotics, I mean, a deep cut on your hand from a piece of shattered rock could easily lead to a fatal infection.
Exactly. So they have the steep learning curve, they have the physical danger, and then they have the output quality.
Right, because they point out that their initial amateur attempts at making these arrowheads just resulted in useless, jagged, shattered chunks of flint.
They had spent hours banging rocks together, and instead of a beautiful aerodynamic arrowhead, they just had a pile of useless gravel.
The early prototypes were objectively failures, and that leads to their final, most damning, most logical point. They say, our fire-hardened sticks already work fine. Why are we wasting time and bleeding all over ourselves for a pile of gravel when we could be out hunting with the tools that already put meat on the fire?
They performed a totally rational risk-benefit analysis based on tangible, immediate downsides.
Right.
Cut fingers, wasted time, broken rocks. And they decided the return on investment simply wasn't there. They were optimizing for immediate safety and efficiency.
But it was a fatal strategic error.
Yeah.
Because history gives us the devastating conclusion to this story. Tens of thousands of years later, modern archaeologists are digging in the dirt, and they uncover a mass grave of Neanderthals.
Oh, this part is wild.
Yeah. Every single skull in that grave has a hole punched through the bone. And when the archaeologists pick up one of those skulls and shake it, a small object rattles around inside.
A flint arrowhead.
Just absolutely brutal. Tens of thousands of years later, the ultimate price of their completely rational management decision is paid in full.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of those elders. I mean, they were operating out of intense risk aversion.
Sure, which makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
In a harsh environment, risk aversion is a deeply ingrained, highly logical survival mechanism.
Right.
You don't take unnecessary chances when starvation is always 3 days away.
Right.
But they committed a fatal cognitive error. They failed to separate the process of learning a new technology from the ultimate value of the technology itself.
Okay, that is such a vital distinction. Can you break down exactly how that cognitive error works?
Certainly. The elders were evaluating the friction of the transition rather than evaluating the state of completion.
Oh, I see.
They looked at the shattered rocks and the bleeding fingers, and they assumed that pain was an inherent feature of the flint arrowhead. But it wasn't. The pain was just the toll they had to pay to cross the bridge from the old technology to the new one.
Right.
Survival in a shifting landscape isn't just about raw intelligence or maintaining the status quo. It is entirely about the willingness to endure that painful, messy, bleeding finger phase of learning a new skill, rather than retreating back to the comfortable, proven method the second things get difficult.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and it immediately makes me think of a more modern analogy.
Well, let's hear it.
Let's imagine it's the late 2000s, right? The iPhone has just come out, maybe the first Android devices are hitting the market. And you have a business professional who is aggressively refusing to switch from their reliable, indestructible old flip phone with a tactile keypad.
Oh yeah, holding on to it for dear life.
Exactly. And they sit there and say, look at your smartphone. The battery life is terrible. It dies by 3 p.m. The touchscreen is completely unresponsive. I can't type fast on it without looking. It constantly drops calls.
I remember those days.
Right. And they say, my flip phone already makes calls perfectly fine. The audio quality is better, and the battery lasts a full week on a single charge.
And if we look at the reality reality of, say, 2007 or 2008, just like the elders in Og's tribe,
Right.
every single one of those objections was factually true.
100%.
Early smartphones were clunky. The batteries were terrible. The early touchscreens required you to essentially punch the glass just to get a response.
Exactly. But that completely factual objection misses the inevitable trajectory of the technology. I mean, yes, you might be right about the battery today, but you are ignoring the underlying mechanism of what a smartphone actually is.
It's a pocket-sized computer connected to the entire world's information infrastructure.
Yes. And if you refuse to endure the clunky battery phase and adapt to the ecosystem, 5 years later, you don't have a GPS map in your pocket, you can't check your email while traveling, you don't have a high-definition camera on you at all times, and you are professionally, socially, and economically left behind.
The flip phone is the fire-hardened stick.
Yes.
Precisely. And the people who adopted the smartphone early had to deal with the dropped calls. They had to deal with carrying around charging cables everywhere. They had to metaphorically cut their fingers on the flint.
Right.
But by going through that friction, they were the ones who ultimately mastered the new tool ecosystem. When the technology matured, they were already positioned to leverage it. They rode the wave of progress instead of being crushed by it when the market abruptly shifted.
But wait, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener, because this is tricky. If every objection the Neanderthal elders had was factually true, and every objection the flip phone user had was factually true, how is a group, or even you as an individual listener right now, supposed to know when to listen to your own common sense and when to ignore it for the sake of adaptation?
That is the big question.
I mean, shouldn't we trust our gut when we see something that is clearly flawed? If a new app comes out and it deletes half my files, I shouldn't just keep using it in the name of progress.
No, definitely not. That is the million-dollar question right there.
Yeah.
And the answer lies in understanding why something is flawed. You have to evaluate the underlying mechanics of the failure.
Okay.
Is the technology fundamentally useless, structurally unsound, and solving a problem that doesn't exist? Or is it a revolutionary mechanism that is simply in its infancy?
Okay, give me an example of the difference.
Well, think about the elders looking at the chunk of shattered flint. They saw failure because it didn't look like an arrowhead. But the Cro-Magnon looked at the exact same chunk of shattered flint and saw a step in the process.
Right.
They understood that the physical properties of the stone allowed for a razor-sharp edge, and the shattering was just a calibration error of human force.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, are your objections based on the tool being inherently bad at its core function, or are your objections based on your own reluctance to be a beginner again?
Because being a beginner is incredibly uncomfortable.
It really is. It challenges your sense of competence. It threatens your status as an expert.
And speaking of challenging status, that leads us directly into our next historical landscape. Because if a technology survives the practical, friction-based objections of the workers, it eventually faces an even bigger boss, which is the institutions holding the power.
Oh, absolutely.
Og's tribe rejected technology for practical, immediate reasons, cut fingers and wasted time. But as human societies evolved and became more complex, a new, much more insidious reason to reject disruptive technology emerged. And that is the preservation of social hierarchy and institutional power.
So we are moving out of the caves and stepping onto the medieval battlefields of Europe.
Yes, let's talk about the crossbow. In medieval warfare, the crossbow was the ultimate paradigm-shattering disruptive tech. Up until the popularization of the crossbow, the absolute apex predator on the battlefield was the heavy armored knight.
And we really need to deeply contextualize what a knight actually represented in medieval society. A knight was not just a soldier.
Right.
A knight represented an enormous concentration of capital, land, and generational time. You had to have the immense wealth required to buy custom-forged armor. I mean, think about chainmail, tens of thousands of individually riveted steel rings designed to distribute the kinetic energy of a sword blow. You had to afford the war horses, the squires to maintain the gear, and crucially, you had to spend literally your entire life from childhood mastering the complex martial arts required to fight effectively while wearing 60 pounds of steel.
It was an elite, deeply gate-kept status. You couldn't just decide to be a knight. The entire feudal system, the entire social pyramid, rested on the military supremacy of these armored nobles. If you were a peasant, you were basically just fodder.
Right. And then along comes the crossbow. And the crossbow completely breaks the mathematics of medieval warfare. because it introduces a mechanical advantage that bypasses human biology.
Okay, explain how that worked physically, because a longbow existed, right? Why was the crossbow different?
Well, a traditional longbow is incredibly powerful, but it relies entirely on the biological strength and lifelong training of the archer. To draw back a 120-pound longbow and hold it steady requires massive, highly developed back muscle.
Which takes years.
Exactly. It takes years to build that strength.
Right.
If you hand a longbow to an untrained farmer, they literally cannot pull the string back, let alone aim it.
Yeah.
But a crossbow utilizes a mechanical system. The bow itself, called the prod, is mounted horizontally on a wooden stock, the tiller. And the genius of the crossbow is the rolling nut and the trigger mechanism.
Because it captures the energy, right?
Exactly. You could use a mechanical lever or a winch system like a windlass to slowly draw the string back with a massive amount of force, hundreds of pounds of tension, and then the rolling nut catches the string and holds it.
Wow.
The machine is holding the tension, not the human muscles. The energy is stored indefinitely.
So a completely untrained peasant, a guy who has been pulling turnips out of the ground his whole life, can pick up this device, crank back the string using mechanical leverage, drop a heavy bolt onto the track, and just hold it.
Yep.
He can stand there for 5 minutes, aim it perfectly at a charging knight, pull the trigger, and that bolt carries enough kinetic energy to punch straight through the knight's riveted chainmail and end his life.
It instantly leveled the social hierarchy. I mean, it took the most expensive, most highly trained, most culturally revered military asset in the world and made it entirely vulnerable to a starving farmer who would practice with the weapon for maybe a single afternoon.
The democratization of violence?
Precisely.
So how did the institutional power structure of the day respond to this? When the ruling class saw that their lifelong investment in armor and training could be negated by a wooden mechanical device, did they adapt? Did they start rapidly arming their own peasant levies with crossbows to gain a tactical advantage?
No. They did what the establishment almost always does when its foundational power is threatened by disruptive new technology.
Right.
They tried to legislate the future out of existence. They tried to ban it.
Specifically, the church intervened. We are talking about the Second Lateran Council in the year 1139. Pope Innocent II presided over it.
Right.
And in Canon 29, they outright banned the use of crossbows and bows and slings as well. But the crossbow was the primary target in conflicts between Christians. They literally declared it deadly and God detested.
They literally put it on paper. They decreed, from the highest moral and legal authority in the Western world at the time, that this technology was illegal. And we have to look at the motivation here.
Okay.
Why did they ban it? They weren't banning it because it was too bloody. Medieval warfare was already horrific.
Oh, yeah.
They banned it because it subverted the divine order. The nobility believed they were ordained by God to rule. A peasant killing a knight wasn't just a military loss. It was a theological crisis. It threatened the entire fabric of feudalism.
And the outcome of this ban, well, you could probably guess. The ban completely and utterly failed. You cannot uninvent a tool just because it makes the ruling class uncomfortable. The physics of the crossbow didn't care about a papal degree.
And that is the crucial lesson. Technology operates completely outside of human legislation. A crossbow bolt flying through the air at 200 feet per second obeys the laws of aerodynamics and kinetic energy. It does not obey Canon 29 of the Second Lateran Council.
So what actually happened on the ground? Well, the world moved on. The commanders and the armies who quietly ignored the ban, the ones who realized that physics trumps policy, started hiring mercenary crossbowmen.
Yeah, they integrated the technology.
And they were the ones winning the skirmishes. Progress marched right over the Lateran Council's decree. And eventually, the crossbow itself was replaced by an even more lethal disruptive technology, which was firearms.
Guns.
Right. The archivists eventually won the Battle of Cerignola in 1503, completely cementing the end of the armored knight era.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this medieval history is a pristine textbook example of why legacy leaders and deeply entrenched institutions consistently underestimate and inappropriately react to disruptive technologies.
It's a pattern.
It is. The church and the nobility weren't trying to protect the peasants from the horrors of war. They were trying to protect themselves from the future. Whenever a new tool democratizes a previously gate-kept skill, whether that skill is violence on a battlefield or generating code in a cubicle, the people who currently hold the keys to that gate will always declare the new tool invalid.
It is so wildly familiar. I mean, think about how seasoned legacy businesses today react when they are suddenly terrified by lean, agile startups equipped with new tech. I'm thinking of massive traditional corporations.
Oh, absolutely.
The legacy business has spent decades building massive infrastructure. They have huge legal teams, massive glass corporate headquarters, entrenched supply chains, and armies of middle managers. That infrastructure is their chainmail. That is their armor.
Great analogy.
Thanks. And then a startup comes along with a cloud-based software solution or an AI-driven logistics platform that does the exact same job, faster, with 3 people working out of a garage. The startup is the peasant with the crossbow.
And what does the legacy business do? They rarely try to out-innovate the startup. Instead, they do exactly what the medieval nobility did. They turn to the modern equivalent of the church. They lobby for regulatory friction.
They go to Congress.
Exactly. They put out aggressive PR campaigns calling the startup's tech untested, unsafe, or unethical. They try to use institutional gravity to slow down the adoption curve because they know they cannot compete on the new playing field.
I have to ask, though, trying to get into the headspace of these historical figures, was the Pope or the nobility at the time actually delusional enough to think a piece of parchment with a wax seal would stop a peasant whose village was being raided from picking up a crossbow to defend himself?
That's a great question.
Or was this just a desperate PR move by an establishment that secretly knew it was losing its grip on power?
It is almost certainly a mix of both, but heavily weighted toward the illusion of control. Institutions that have held power for centuries, through decrees, traditions, and spoken laws, genuinely begin to believe that reality itself will bend to their rules. Yeah, they mistake their social constructs for laws of physics. They believe that because they declare something invalid, the market, or the battlefield, will agree. But the market, just like the battlefield, is ruthlessly pragmatic. The entities that adopt the superior tool, despite the institutional stigma, are the ones who ultimately survive to write the history books and set the new paradigm.
Which brings us into the 20th century. We've seen technology rejected for practical, friction-based reasons with Og. We've seen it rejected for status-driven, institutional reasons with the medieval church. But as we move into World War II, we see technology rejected for perfectionist reasons.
And this one is fascinating.
It is, and it's perhaps the most terrifying example because it proves that even highly advanced, modern, incredibly intelligent scientific institutions can fall into the exact same fatal trap.
This brings us to the story of the cavity magnetron.
Okay, setting the stage here. It's 1940. World War II is raging. 2 physicists in England, John Randall and Harry Boot, are working at the University of Birmingham. They build this device called a cavity magnetron. It's a special kind of vacuum tube that generates microwaves. And the performance metrics on this thing are absolutely staggering. It rapidly scaled from producing hundreds of watts to a kilowatt to 25 kilowatts, and eventually pushed out 100 kilowatts of power.
That's massive.
And the physical footprint of this device, it was literally the size of a small book. You could hold it in your hand.
That size-to-power ratio is the critical factor in this entire narrative, because the primary military application for microwave technology was radar.
Let's break down the radar problem at that time.
Well, early radar systems were severely limited by physics. They operated on longer wavelengths. And a fundamental rule of radio antennas is that the size of the antenna must be proportional to the wavelength it is transmitting and receiving.
Okay, so long waves mean big antennas.
Exactly. To generate and receive the long waves of early radar, you needed absolutely enormous antennas. You had to build massive steel towers on the coastline or install giant arrays on battleships. It was physically impossible to fit a functional, powerful radar system into an airplane.
Which is where you desperately needed it for nighttime dogfighting and submarine hunting.
Right. So enter the magnetron. By generating microwaves, which are extremely short wavelengths, the magnetron shrunk the necessary antenna size drastically.
Suddenly, you could build a radar dome small enough to literally bolt onto the nose of a night fighter plane, while pumping out enough raw power to see for miles in pitch darkness.
But here is the massive Og moment of World War II. The British physicists in 1940 were not the first to figure this out. Germany, the opposing force, actually had this idea years earlier. A German engineer named Hans Hollmann patented a multi-cavity magnetron back in 1935.
Wait, really? Germany had the blueprint for the most decisive piece of electronic warfare technology 5 years before the war really heated up.
They did. But when the German military engineers tested it and looked at the data, they saw a technical flaw. They discovered a phenomenon called frequency drift.
Okay, explain frequency drift. Why was this such a deal breaker for them?
Well, a magnetron works by forcing electrons to spiral through a magnetic field past a series of hollow copper cavities. As the electrons pass the openings of these cavities, they induce an oscillating electromagnetic field, which is microwaves.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's conceptually similar to blowing air over the open top of a glass bottle to create a tone. But as the device operates, it generates heat. The copper expands slightly, the voltage might fluctuate.
So the tone changes.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Because of these chaotic variables, the exact frequency of the microwaves it emitted would drift up and down slightly during operation. It wasn't perfectly stable, it was a messy brute force way to generate power.
So the German engineers looked at this drifting frequency, and their deeply ingrained engineering culture of precision and stability just took over. They declared the magnetron not good enough. They demanded perfection.
Yes.
They rejected it, and instead, they stuck with the proven technology. They already had a different type of vacuum tube called a klystron.
And the klystron was a beautiful piece of engineering. It used a linear beam of electrons. It was incredibly stable. It didn't drift. It was a perfectly engineered, highly predictable piece of equipment.
But there was a catch.
A big one. There was only one problem. Due to its internal physics, it physically could not reach the high-power outputs needed for long-range airborne radar. It topped out at a fraction of what the magnetron could do.
So they chose a perfectly engineered, highly stable, but ultimately weak tool over a flawed, messy, but exponentially more powerful one: fatal perfectionism.
Meanwhile, let's look at the Allied approach. Britain realizes they have this incredible device, but their manufacturing is being bombed to rubble. So they take the magnetron and share it with the United States in 1940 in a famous exchange called the Tizard mission.
Right, Edward Bowen.
Yes, a physicist named Edward Bowen takes this small, book-sized copper device to the Americans.
I really love this part of the history. Bowen goes into the meeting, and at the time, the U.S. Navy engineers were using klystrons too, and they were frustrated because their devices were putting out a measly 10 watts of power. They were barely lighting up a light bulb. And Bowen pulls this copper block out of his bag, sets it on the table, and says, "This generates 1,000 times that power."
The American response was immediate, aggressive adaptation. They didn't scoff at the frequency drift. They saw the raw potential. Bell Labs, which was the pinnacle of industrial research, reverse-engineered and copied the technology practically overnight.
Incredible.
The legendary MIT Radiation Laboratory, the RAD Lab, was founded almost entirely around exploring and scaling this specific device. They didn't care that it wasn't perfectly stable yet. They decided to adopt the raw power immediately and iterate on the flaws in real time.
And the outcome of that decision literally altered the course of human history. That centimetric radar born from the magnetron was bolted into Allied planes. Suddenly, these planes could hunt German U-boats at night.
Which was huge.
The U-boats, which previously had this impenetrable cloak of invisibility when they surfaced to recharge their batteries under the cover of darkness, were suddenly completely exposed from the air.
Yeah, and the radar drastically improved the accuracy of high-altitude bombing. And when this microwave technology was miniaturized even further into the proximity fuse, it made anti-aircraft artillery so deadly precise that they were shooting down incredibly fast V-1 flying bombs over London.
Wow.
The impact was so profound that military historians universally agree it was a decisive factor in winning the war. One historian explicitly called the magnetron the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores.
This raises an incredibly important question about how we integrate new technology today, because this historical event is an absolute masterclass in the philosophy of enterprise software integration and technology adoption. You have two highly advanced, highly intelligent nations facing the exact same technological dilemma. One nation's culture demands perfect stability before deployment, rejects a massive evolutionary leap forward because of a minor technical flaw, and ultimately loses the strategic advantage.
And the other nation takes the messy, flawed, drifting, but exponentially more powerful tool, rapidly adopts it into their workflow, iterates on the fly, and wins the war.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to push back on that framing. Because it is really easy for us, sitting here with decades of hindsight in a comfortable studio, to say the Allies were brilliant pragmatists and the Germans were foolish perfectionists.
Sure.
But let's try to put ourselves in the shoes of a German military engineer in 1935. You are building complex electronic equipment for the military. Your literal job is to ensure reliability.
Right.
If you have a device that exhibits frequency drift, isn't your professional duty exactly to say, hey, this isn't safe, predictable, or reliable yet? How does a modern business leader trying to integrate AI differentiate between fatal perfectionism that will doom your company
Yeah.
and just basic necessary quality control?
That is the exact tension every agile company faces today when evaluating new software.
Yeah.
And the difference lies in understanding the concept of technological ceilings versus technological floors.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the German engineers correctly identified that the Claystron was stable. That was its ceiling. It was as good as it was ever going to get, but it could never cross the threshold of power required to solve the core problem of airborne radar.
Ah, okay.
But the magnetron's floor, its flawed, drifting, messy baseline, was still 1,000 times more powerful than the Claystron's absolute ceiling.
Okay, wow. The floor of the new tech is higher than the ceiling of the old tech.
Exactly. Fatal perfectionism is demanding that the new revolutionary tool immediately meet the legacy stability metrics of the old tool before you even try to use it.
Which is impossible for version 1.0 of anything.
Right. Agile adaptation, on the other hand, is recognizing that you can fix the frequency drift in version 2.0. You can build better cooling systems, you can stabilize the voltage, but you desperately need the raw, unadulterated power of version 1.0 right now just to stay in the game and maintain parity with your competitors.
You fix the drift in version 2.0. That is such a powerful way to frame it. The Allies accepted the clunky drifting version because the sheer tactical advantage of the power completely outstripped the inconvenience of the instability. The Germans tried to protect their cultural standard of pristine engineering, and it cost them their strategic dominance.
Which brings us directly, crashing into the current wave of technological disruption. Because the historical pattern we've just traced over thousands of years, from Ogg's practical objections about cut fingers, to the medieval church's status-driven bans, to the German military's fatal perfectionism, it proves one undeniable truth.
What's that?
These objections, no matter how sincere, how logical, or how factually grounded they are in the moment, never ever stop the wave of progress.
Never. And that wave, right now, the one crashing over every industry, is artificial intelligence. Generative AI, large language models, autonomous agents. The debate around AI is everywhere.
It really is.
And if you look closely, you can see these exact historical ghosts haunting our current conversations on social media, in boardrooms, and in academic circles.
Oh, absolutely. We see highly intelligent people, experienced professionals, actively resisting modern AI tools, whether it's AI-generated text, AI-generated images, or AI-assisted coding. They dismiss the entire field using a very specific two-word psychological shield.
And what's that?
AI slop.
Oh man, I hear it all the time. It has become a reflex. People see an AI-generated image where a hand has 6 fingers, or the text on a sign in the background is just complete gibberish,
Yeah.
or they read a paragraph of ChatGPT text that sounds a bit generic, uses the word delve too many times, and lacks a certain human spark, and they hold it up like a trophy and say, see? AI slop. It's garbage. It hallucinates. It's a parlor trick. We don't need to worry about this replacing our jobs.
Yeah. Now, we need to be incredibly nuanced here, because this is where the trap lies. Just like the Neanderthal elders looking at the shattered flint, and just like the German engineers measuring the frequency drift, the people saying this are factually correct in their narrow observation.
Right.
There is a massive amount of bad, low-quality AI output cluttering up the internet right now. Hallucinations are real, generic output is real, calling it out has real value, and it is important to maintain standards of quality.
But, and this is the modern manifestation of the paradox of progress, mistaking the fact that some AI output is low quality today for the sweeping absolute conclusion that AI fundamentally doesn't matter and I don't need to learn it. That is a fatal career error.
It's the exact same cognitive mistake as looking at a broken piece of rock and saying stone tools will never work.
Or looking at the frequency drift and throwing the magnetron in the trash.
Exactly. The phrase AI slop functions as a psychological shield against the terror of the unknown. It is a defense mechanism. By labeling the entire technology with a derogatory term based on its current earliest flaws, legacy leaders and skeptical individuals make themselves feel safe. They feel intellectually superior to the machine. They preserve their status as the expert.
But while they are feeling safe and superior, the ground is completely shifting beneath them. Agile companies aren't complaining about the slop. They are taking that imperfect AI, accepting that it might hallucinate right now, and they're spending their energy learning how to refine it, how to prompt it better, how to build guardrails around it, and how to integrate it deeply into their workflows.
It is the ultimate illusion of safety. Let's look at a concrete example of how this plays out in business.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the transition from analog architectural drafting to early CAD computer-aided design software in the 1980s and 90s. The older architects, the masters of the drafting table, looked at early CAD and scoffed. They pointed out that it was slow, the computers crashed constantly, and the printed lines lacked the soul and variable weight of a hand-drawn blueprint. They basically called it digital slop. And they were factually right. Early CAD was clunky.
But if an architecture firm decided to wait until CAD was perfect before buying a computer, they went bankrupt. The firms that survived endured the crashes, learned the clunky interface, and eventually, when the software matured, they could produce in an hour what took the analog draftsman a week.
Exactly. The wave of technology does not care what derogatory names legacy leaders call it. The physics of the market do not care about your aesthetic preference for the old way of doing things.
Yeah.
It doesn't care if a famous CEO goes on television and eloquently argues that AI can never truly replicate human creativity or empathy. While that CEO is giving that televised interview and feeling very smart, an agile startup across town is using a suite of imperfect AI tools to do the work of a 50-person logistics department in 3 hours, at a fraction of the cost.
So I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Let's make this intensely personal. What does this all mean for you in your specific career right now? Are you using the flaws in current AI models, the occasional hallucinations, the weird formatting, the fact that it struggles with certain logic puzzles as an excuse to avoid learning how to prompt them?
Are you sitting at your desk right now, clinging to your metaphorical fire-hardened stick of manual spreadsheets, legacy software, and endless email chains, simply because the new AI tool feels clunky, makes you feel like a beginner, and occasionally makes mistakes?
Because if the answer is yes, you are falling into the exact same trap as Ogg's elders. You are letting the friction of being a beginner prevent you from acquiring the skills necessary for survival in the next decade, because the historical pattern is undeniable, unbroken, and ruthless. Rejecting the wave is fatal.
Which means the only actionable path forward is to fundamentally shift our mindset regarding how we measure our own success and intelligence during these massive technological shifts.
This brings us to the core thesis of how individuals must operate today. Adaptation speed is the ultimate and perhaps only survival metric.
Right.
The paradox of progress cuts both ways, right? It destroys those who stubbornly refuse it, but it is the sole reason our species is still here, dominating the planet.
Yeah, because despite all the resistance, despite the elders in the church and the perfectionist engineers, someone eventually sat down and napped the flint.
Some military commander hired the crossbowman.
Exactly. Some wild-eyed scientist looked at the magnetron and said, I'll take the frequency drift. Let's bolt this thing into an airplane and see what happens. We survive because some individuals choose the messy reality of the future over the pristine comfort of the past.
But this reveals a very uncomfortable truth about history, human progress, and meritocracy. The survivors, the people and the companies who thrived during these massive shifts, were not necessarily the ones with the highest absolute intelligence, and they often weren't even the ones who invented the brilliant ideas in the first place.
Think about that for a second. Germany invented and patented the multi-cavity magnetron in 1935. They had the raw, foundational intelligence. They had the geniuses who understood the physics, but they lost the radar war.
Because the metric of success during a technological revolution isn't raw intellect or the ability to invent. It is the capacity to adapt.
Yes. The Cro-Magnon won because they were willing to change their entire way of hunting. The U.S. and Britain won the radar war because they were willing to abandon their standard operating procedures and embrace a flawed, drifting piece of copper overnight.
Survival in a shifting environment is dictated almost entirely by the speed of adaptation.
And that is the exact test we are all facing right now. The AI wave isn't here to test human cleverness. It is not a standardized test to see if you can write a better, more nuanced essay than ChatGPT without using it.
Right, that is the wrong game.
It is testing human adaptability. The choice we have right now isn't a moral choice to be pro-AI or anti-AI. The technology already exists. The math has been solved. The arrowheads are already in the ground.
So the only choice you have is whether you are going to be the flint napper, cutting your fingers as you learn the new interface, or if you're going to be Ogg's tribe, confidently holding a blunt stick while the world passes you by.
So practically speaking, how do individuals actually adopt this growth mindset? How do you take the fear, the very rational fear of being replaced, or the psychological shield of calling it slop, and replace it with an adaptive learning mindset.
That's the hard part.
It is. It starts with deliberately resetting your expectations. You have to actively accept that the initial phase of using any powerful new tool will be deeply frustrating. You will get slop. You will spend 2 hours trying to prompt an AI to format a report, only to realize you could have done it manually in 1 hour.
Oh, I've been there. And your brain immediately screams, see? The fire-hardened stick was faster? This is a waste of time.
Exactly. That is the voice of the Neanderthal elder in your head. But you have to push through that valley of friction. Because you aren't just learning to do that one specific task, you are learning the grammar of the new technology. You are learning how the machine thinks.
That's a great way to put it.
The same information, a new arrowhead, a new radar, a new AI tool is presented to 2 different groups of people. The resulting divergence in their fates, whether they end up in a mass grave or thriving in a new era, is entirely based on the speed at which they adapt to the messiness of progress.
Okay, I hear that, and intellectually I agree, but I have to synthesize this and push back on behalf of everyone listening who is just plain tired.
Fair enough.
Because adapting fast is physically and mentally exhausting. If the speed of adaptation is truly the only metric that matters, are we doomed to just perpetually run on an accelerating technological treadmill? Are we just constantly abandoning our reliable, fire-hardened sticks every few months for the rest of our lives?
Yeah, I hear you.
Because if that is the future, that sounds like a recipe for absolute society-wide burnout.
It is exhausting, and you are right. Burnout is a very real systemic risk. But the alternative is obsolescence, which is far worse. However, the key to surviving this without burning out isn't to frantically adopt every single new app that launches on a Tuesday.
Oh, thank goodness.
The key is to cultivate an underlying agility. It's a meta skill. You don't need to master every single AI model that drops. You need to master the skill of learning how to interface with AI models generally.
Ah, I see.
Once you accept that the ground beneath you is always going to be shifting, you stop wasting your energy trying to build a rigid castle on the sand. Instead, you learn how to surf.
Right.
The deep fatigue people feel right now comes from resisting the waves. It comes from bracing against the impact. When you align yourself with the momentum of progress, the learning curve actually becomes a source of propulsion rather than a source of friction.
Learn to surf. Stop building castles on the sand. I love that. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We've gone from the caves to the battlefields to the laboratories and finally to your own desk.
It's been a ride.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a specific internal challenge based directly on the history we've been exploring. Think back to that haunting reality. The arrowheads are already in the ground. The future has already happened. We are just waiting for the archaeological dig to prove who survived and who didn't. So I want you to think about a specific new tool, a piece of software, or a methodology in your own industry right now that you have been secretly hoping will just blow over.
We all have one.
We do. Maybe it's an AI coding assistant, a new generative design platform, or a completely different way of structuring your data. Ask yourself honestly, are your objections to this new tool based on genuine, insurmountable long-term flaws? Or are you just instinctively, subconsciously protecting your comfortable fire-hardened stick? Are you just avoiding the cut fingers of progress?
Because if you are just avoiding the discomfort of being a beginner again, history is very clear about how that story ends.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. You are now armed with the historical context to look out at this overwhelming wave of technology and see it for what it truly is: not a threat to your intelligence, not a judgment on your past skills, but a pure, unadulterated test of your adaptability.
And if you know someone, a colleague, a friend, a boss who's currently standing on the beach trying to hold back the tsunami with one hand by loudly calling it slop, share this deep dive with them.
It might just save them a lot of grief. Don't be like Ogg's elders. Fix the frequency drift in version 2.0. Stay curious, stay adaptable, and we will see you on the next deep dive.